Hi, it's Gwyneth here from Feel Good Coaching and Consulting, helping you to feel good about you when it comes to actually getting ready for an interview, because the best time to start preparing for an interview is today, even if you haven't yet applied for a job. The number one complaint problem that people come to me with is that they do not like talking about themselves, and the only way to get over that is to start practicing today. So in this video, I want to talk about how you should prepare for answering those questions around problems, making mistakes, having disagreements. There is a very clear structure that you can follow, which I'm just going to describe to you. And again, it's very, very important that you've already thought about relevant examples well in advance of any interview that you have. So these questions in a competency-based interview might come up such as, tell us about a time when you experienced disagreement with a colleague. Tell us about a time when you made a mistake. Tell us about a time when you had a problem in a project in the office. Now, the first thing to do is to not start philosophizing. Well, of course, working in an organization, in this type of business, there are always going to be disagreements. Working with humans, there are always going to be mistakes. That is not what the question is asking you. The question is, tell us about a time when. So make very, very sure that you have understood what you are being asked to answer. The first part of the answer, therefore, should be, yes, I can give you an example. And you give the example, you set out what the problem was. The second part to that question must be how you resolved it. So it's important to choose an example that includes you specifically and not hundreds of people or millions of euros involved in some kind of a budget, but something that the people on the hiring panel are going to understand. And number three, very, very important, what was your learning so that you don't make the same mistake again? Now, in projects, any kind of teamwork, there is always going to be some sort of disagreement, especially if you've got people working from different cultures, different educational backgrounds, not necessarily working even in the same place. Maybe you're only speaking to each other over video. It's quite natural for things to go wrong. We're humans after all. I can say that. You don't say that in your interview. But it's important, as I said, to choose an example over which you had control so that you can demonstrate that you provided the solution, and then talk about your learning. Now, when you're talking about disagreements in particular, another important aspect of this is to not give names and any identifying data to the extent possible. So instead of saying, in my last job, you could say, in one of my previous positions. Instead of saying, my supervisor, you could say, a senior colleague. Instead of talking about he or she, even though it's grammatically totally incorrect, these days, in the interests of gender neutrality, it's perfectly acceptable to say they. So you would say, yes, in a previous position, I was working with a team and there was a colleague with whom things weren't completely clear. They missed a couple of deadlines despite us speaking to each other. They kept on missing deadlines, and so I decided it was time to actually sit down and have a proper conversation, go right back to the beginning of things, ask them to tell me their input, give me their input, tell me what their ideas were, so that we could then agree on a compromise. My learning from this has been to, in the future, to not assume that just because everybody's already in a team, that they agree with everything you're doing and that they know exactly what their tasks should be. From then on, I've always made it a point of sitting down with everybody and having that one-to-one conversation, because it saves a lot of time in the future. Very simple. No identifying words in there. One of the reasons it's not good to use identifiers is that you don't know who's on the panel. You don't know if you're speaking to somebody's mother, cousin, brother, uncle. You've just no idea. So keep it as discreet as possible, but it must be relevant. When it comes to talking about disagreements, it doesn't have to be a huge fight with somebody. I work with many people who get frustrated about the colleagues in their office turning the temperature of the heating up, and they prefer to somebody else prefers to have it cooler, or somebody bringing their lunch into the office and then everything smells. Or perfume, that's another thing. There are lots of things that cause us to feel irritated that in the long term, if they're not dealt with, can actually result in working relationships breaking down. So over the next few days and weeks, do start thinking, where are those irritations and what are you doing to ensure that they don't grow into something more? So that is how you deal with any questions relating to tell us about a problem when, tell us about a time when you made a mistake, and tell us about, a time when you had a conflict or disagreement with a colleague. State the issue, state the problem, state the mistake, state the process that you use to resolve that problem, and then tell the panel what your learning was. You will not go wrong.